identical. Right? But they're not identical. You see the little pieces up at the top, right? So people understand, and they say, we need more eye fields in China. And that slips past the automated sensors, right? It's very clever. Okay. That's called a homograph. Here's another example. I can use your help even more. Can you pronounce the harmonious society, the official slogan of the Chinese government? Can you? I can't even repeat it. Okay. So that also is also going to be filtered out. You know, they're not going to see it. People would like to be able to say this word in Chinese social media. So what do they use? They use this completely different looking word, which
also pronounced as food.
Yes.
It's pronounced as bullshit.
Which is, in other words, it's exactly the same. Okay. And it means river crab. So what you say is the policy of river crab sucks, okay? And that goes through no problem. Okay? That's an irrelevant word. It doesn't have any meaning. That's called a homophone. The two sound very similar. Okay? So the real question is, you know, they can't follow this conversation. And why can't they follow this conversation? They don't need to, because they filter it out, and then they have censors, a lot of censors. They read all the social media posts that appear on Chinese websites, and they decide which ones to take down. And they do it within a couple of hours of posting. We estimated in 2013 there were about 80 billion social media posts. This is a big operation. Okay? I have a lot of research assistants and collaborators, but not that many. So we needed a technology to be able to follow the conversation when the people of China just diverted and went off in a different direction. Right? We developed this technology to suggest, which we call Thresher, to suggest keywords. Okay? Because because it turns out that humans are really bad at thinking of keywords. Now that sounds crazy because we do it all the time when we do Google searches. But it turns out there's a psychological process that causes us to not remember after we've remembered a bunch of words. Do you know the feeling of having an idea on the tip of your tongue? That's something in your brain causing you to not remember. It's an inhibitory process. And if we didn't have that process, when we think of an idea like an apple, that would activate all the ideas connected to it, like a pear. And the pear would activate, let's say, two apples. And two apples might activate fruit. And fruit might activate banana. And banana might activate slip. And slip might activate Groucho Marx. And, who knows? Right? And then what would happen is, if anything was activated, everything that was ever in your brain would come cascading into your teeny little working memory, and you would collapse. Right? You can't hold that much information in you. So your brain must have inhibitory processes. And as it happens, psychologists have studied this. Recalling keywords is really hard after the first view. Okay? Think of 150 words that mean that could be used to select words that mean Obamacare. Right? You could probably come up with 10, maybe 20, but 150. Okay. So it's hard to convince you of that, but it really is true. So we realized that humans, although they're not good at recalling because of these inhibitory processes, they're excellent at recognizing. Once I show you this, you understand what's going on, right? If you see a sentence that says, we need more eye fields in China, you look at that, you can immediately recognize what's going on, okay? So we came up with this algorithm to generate words, to discover likely words, and then we pair the algorithm with an actual human. And the human recognizes, says, this word's relevant, not relevant, not relevant. And so that enables us to follow the conversation. Turns out the same task has lots and lots of applications. Long tail search. So in 15% of the searches in Google have never been searched for before. It's not cool fact. 15%. Okay. So and that's called the long tail of long tail search. And Thresher, by the way, is a shark with a really long tail. Isn't that great? Come on, that was great. Okay. So this is relevant for long tail search. This will help find the words that are relevant. Government analysts. A government analyst, or like an intelligence analyst, basically has to choose keywords in order to try to find Osama bin Laden. And if they choose too many keywords, then they get overwhelmed with information, and too few, they won't even have the relevant information. And so this technology would help with that. A couple of years ago, we had the Boston Marathon bombings, and all of us in Boston were sort of hunkered down in our houses. They closed the whole community, the whole area. They closed down the whole place. And since there's only so much you can watch CNN. We're saying the same thing all day. So you go to social media where at least they say the same thing in different ways. And so we would do a search on Twitter for hashtag Boston bombings. And we'd see this stream of stuff, and you'd get some information. I saw this out my window. This is what's happening. And we're also obsessed with not being killed. It's reasonable. And then at some point during the day, the people of Boston got really pissed off and expressed themselves, and they started swapping hashtag Boston bombings with hashtag Boston strong. And people far from Boston would drop hashtag Boston bombings, and they started writing hashtag pray for Boston. And if you didn't know that, and you were at home doing a search, you'd lose the thread of the conversation. But if you were using pressure, which of course didn't exist at the time, but you could have used pressure to surface the words that you would never think of because they didn't, they were just novel, just immediately invented, then you can come up with new things. And there's lots of other things. We actually helped the Department of Homeland Security figure out how to find child pornographers who are sending information back and forth on the basis of crazy little abbreviations, basically. Look-alike modeling is one of my favorites. So if you want to hire a data scientist, which I highly recommend, what word do you use to search for them? Right? Data scientist, right? Well, how about econometrician, political methodologist, sociological methodologist, data wrangler? Actually, there are at least 100 of these words. And they wouldn't necessarily come to mind, but you can use this technology. Pretty much all automated text methods that start with a data set, prune it down a bit in order to make it deal withable. Like if you use Twitter, you don't use all of Twitter, right? You prune out, like cat videos and stuff like that to focus on the things you care about, right? They'll do it by keyword search. So before you do that, you could use this method. Anyway, there's lots of other examples. All right. So far, the questions you've asked have been terrific. When there's missing data, I appeared. So, if you have questions, you should ask. But okay, I'm happy to keep going. We can do questions afterwards if you want. All right. Anyway, I'll just keep talking to myself. Okay. So, computer-assisted reading. To understand tons and tons of text, humans create categories. If it was your job to explain the 650 million social media posts that happen today, the only way you could possibly do that was to say, you know what, they all fit into 5 categories, here's what the 5 categories are. That's the way we human beings understand lots of stuff. It's categorization. In fact, most organizations impose some fixed categorizations to tally customer complaints, or sort reports, or to retrieve information, or to ask questions.
So with this political election cycle, you kind of see the meshing of internet culture and political culture. And have you done any research or looking into how, because internet culture moves so quickly, how it's spreading and changing?
Yeah, actually, I'll give you an example on the next page. So yeah, I think, and the candidates are using the technology as much as conceivably possible. There are a lot of candidates that graduated from the campaign 4 years ago and are now out in half a dozen startups. The ones that elected Obama, or at least contributed to it. And at least Hillary Clinton's campaign has a whole data analytic operation.
Aren't you concerned that with something like pressure and finding the different symbols like the holographs and the holograms in Chinese language that government censors use pressure to find the use of those characters?
Yes, and you should ask me a question like that again when I get to Chinese censorship, which is coming up. But my theory of this is we just keep staying ahead of them. If we don't do anything, they're going to come up with it themselves. And so I think we have to keep staying ahead. So,
with each of these methods, what do you do to quantify uncertainty?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is different for each of the methods. But you have to actually do it. So maybe that's the most important part of your question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're obsessed when I'm obsessed with making myself vulnerable to being proven wrong. Okay? In this project in particular, this came up quite a lot. Okay? I'll explain it in this context. Okay? So if you want to understand a lot of things, you got to put them in categories and say, because it boils it down basically, right? So like here's the things we care about. So here's some bad analytics. Unassisted human categorization is bad analytics because it's basically impossible, right? There's too many things to classify. And then also, you have companies that have like an ontology of customer complaints, and the customer call representative, who you probably hate because they don't know the answer to your question, but in any event, after you talk to them, they have to there's a drop-down box, and they have to put your complaint into one of those categories. Those categories are fixed ahead of time. It's important to understand they're fixed ahead of time. What happens if the customer call representative, who has one of the worst jobs in the world, so be nice to them, what happens if they come up with an idea, like, we should take these two categories, put them together, they're the same thing. And this other category, actually there's 5 separate things, we need to separate that out. What happens if they have that idea? If they have that idea, then it will cost the company a fortune. They'll have to reclassify millions of previous calls. So the company spends a lot of time telling this person to not think new thoughts. Right? The one thing this person's good at, they tell them not to do it. Okay? Okay. On the other end, you may have heard of cluster analysis. Cluster analysis? So what is cluster analysis? Cluster analysis is you take the data, it's an incredibly attractive idea. You take the data, you throw it in, you throw it into this cluster analysis machine. Like 650 million posts go into the machine, and out come 5 categories. And that's just exactly what we want. However,